width at some certain places. And this thing could spread out for miles because the plateau on each side of it, especially down around Jericho and moving up north, the plateaus on each side of it, not really plateaus, they're just level ground land. That water spreads out really far when it gets flood stage. Remember 2011 when the water came out of the Missouri River and it became out of the banks of there, and the river all of a sudden became miles wide. Why? Because it's flat land. And so you're not talking, oh, there's a little flood, there's a little mud on the outside edge here. It's like that down there. It's so low and flat that once the river leaves its banks, it just spreads instantly. And so this is at flood stage. And God says, it's going to stop before you and dry up. And it does. And all Israel crosses over on dry ground, which should be an overflowing river.
They had to go downstream, so it'd be so far away from the ark?
You're talking a very wide area there, but where the ark goes in and the people went by. But they had to stay back that 1,000 yards or whatever. And we'll see that where they cross kind of by it, around it. It says, the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, which he'd already set aside, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you, and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. So he says, Joshua, here's what I want you to do. I want you to, as you guys are walking by, the ark's going to be over here, you guys are going to pass by, I want you to take 12 guys, one from each tribe, tell them to go where they're standing and pick up 12 big stones. Carry them on out of the river. So these are, riverbed stones. And he said, that's what I want. I want you to get 12 of those. Bring them with you as we go to our campsite. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder. So he didn't say, go get a stone, or don't put one in your pocket. This isn't David going to get some sling stones. He said, I want you to take up a stone that you got to put on your shoulder. I want people to see this stone. So he said, go get one. And it says, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, whenever your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. Excuse me. So God, again, is putting this symbol before them. See, here's the thing. God repeatedly reminds the people of Israel what they've been through. Over and over again. We've talked about the Shema in here in Deuteronomy 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then it tells them to talk about it when they walk and when they lay down and when they're dining and when they're going in and out of their houses and all this. Talk about this with your children because God wants them to remember that he did this for them. And he says, here's what I want you to do. Grab 12 stones from the middle of that river that people aren't going to be able just to walk out and grab. And I want you to bring them up here and we're going to make a pile in our camp. And when every person who walks by there and sees those stones, if they don't know what God has done, and they say, hey, why is there this pile of 12 stones here? You have the opportunity to tell them what God has done for Israel. It's a witnessing heap. When people walk by and go, what's that heap of stones? Oh, let me tell you about my God. Let me tell you what he did. Let me tell you where these stones came from. Because I want you to know how awesome my God is. And so throughout the Old Testament, throughout the Israelites wandering, everything, you keep seeing these symbols that God puts before them. The Ark of the Covenant itself, we talked about that. The tent of meeting, the pillar of fire, and the pillar of smoke. All those things are visible representations of God so that people won't forget who brought them there. And then they go, who brought us here? Every morning, with the exception of the Sabbath, they got up and they gathered manna from the ground. A constant reminder that God was providing for them. Every morning. There's no food to go get. There's no crops. And so they would get up and the manna would be laying on the ground and they would harvest this manna so they had food for the day. They said, God, we want meat. So he gives them quail. So much quail they about choked on it. So keep eating, you know. And I'll teach you to complain about quail. Here you go. Anyway, but again, a constant reminder that God was there providing for them. They're in the desert. We don't have water. I'll bring water from a stone. I'll bring water from nowhere. So that the people knew that God was with them. And yet, just about every opportunity they had, they turned their back and forgot. They didn't share it with the next generation. And I'm going to tell you, this is my little soapbox time for just a couple seconds. That's the biggest problem we have in the United States right now. We didn't tell the next generation. And we need to. We need to tell the next generation what God has done for us. What God has done for our nation. Why this nation exists. We should have a pile of 50 stones somewhere and say, let me tell you how each one of these stones got here. Let me tell you what these represent. And each one of them represents a blessing from God. So he says, go ahead and get the stones. Bring it from where the waters were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to their camp. There they put them down. Joshua set up 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood. So he took 12 stones from the outside and said, put them back in there. I want to put a pile of stones in the middle of the river that's more of a symbolic thing, but kind of a spiritual thing of, this is where God did this miracle. And each one of us are going to recognize that miracle that he did for us. And so it says, and they are there to this day. Now the priest who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people. Just as Moses had directed Joshua, the people hurried over, and as soon as all of them had crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priests came to the other side while the people watched. The men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over ready for battle in front of the Israelites, as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for war. So, like Aaron was talking about, did they have to stay away from the ark when they crossed the river? I want to, I guess, kind of dispel one little weird picture that we have in our mind, and that is we have this road, at least I have in the past, this road that's not even as wide as this room probably, with all the Israelites stretched out behind it, and they come walking down one by one, and you know, there may be 10 or 20 abreast, and they just go walking around. They go, there we go. Just the fighting men from those three tribes were 40,000 men. That would be a heck of a parade to have to stand there if they're only that wide. So yes, the ark of the Lord went and stood in the middle of the Jordan. The river stopped almost 15 miles up the river. They still needed to give a wide berth for the actual ark, and that's why they had to send the men over to get the stones. They had permission to go over there. But this crossing would have been probably miles across of these people. Not 1,000 yards, but miles. with a place in the middle for the ark as the people went. But they would have been streaming across that. The plains of Jericho are huge, and they're long. Because, again, it's that whole Rift Valley, it's that whole valley of the Jordan River that comes up from the Dead Sea and goes all the way up to the Sea of Galilee. As you get closer to the Sea of Galilee, it gets a little more hilly and a little more mountainous, but as you get closer to the Dead Sea, it's flat. Okay? So they're crossing western Kansas across a river. And if you've ever driven or ridden a motorcycle across western Kansas, whoo, buddy. My favorite little story, I know we don't have a lot of time, but my favorite story is I lived in Manhattan, Kansas when I was going to school down there. And it was getting into winter, so it was a little bit later in the season than this. And the weatherman came on and said, we are due for a huge storm. We're going to get a lot of snow and ice and cold wind and stuff like that. And he goes, we know this is coming because right now it is snowing in the Black Hills. And the storm is building and it's heading this way. And there's nothing to stop this storm but one big billboard on I-80. And he's right. It left South Dakota and it was a freight train because there was nothing to slow it down. One billboard, And he said, that's the way weather works. And sure enough, it came. But that's what it is here. Big, flat, wide open spaces. And the number of people that had to cross over. And the time frame that they had to do it in. And so this would have been a huge crossing, a huge undertaking. It's also interesting to note that this would play into what the people in Israel today, or the people that were there in the time of Canaan, such as Jericho, would have been thinking. You look out from Jericho, you can see the valley where the Jordan River is. It's not right there, but it's in the distance, and you can see it. It's kind of like, you can be in Glenwood and see the smokestack up here by Manawa. You look down there, and it's like, oh, yeah, there's the Jordan River. You can see the green strip running down there. And if you can imagine miles of people crossing over, the first 40,000 of them are armed for battle, and they're coming your direction, what that would make you think. And here they come, right towards you. And the people in Jericho, we know from Rahab last week, the story, were already melting with fear. Because not only do we see all these people coming, but we know that they escaped the Egyptians. We know that God parted the Red Sea for them. We know they defeated the armies on the other side of the Jordan with no problem, and they were big armies. And they just walked through them like nothing. And here they come. So the last thing the people of Jericho wanted to do was go out and meet them in the field of battle. We'll wait here. You guys, you just have a nice camp out. We'll wait here for you, behind our walls and our gates, because I don't even want to deal with that. And it says, that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses. Then the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests carrying the ark of the covenant law to come up out of the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan. And the priests came up out of the river carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. There was no, oh, look, a little trickle. Maybe it's made its way past that dam. Maybe that blockage has worked its way loose, and here comes it. It just, as quickly as it dried up, came back to flood stage and flowed its whole distance. Just like that. So no matter how God chose to do it, it's still a miracle. And it was still the hand of God who held back those waters and released them for them to walk across. And it says on the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Now, when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, their hearts melted in fear, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. Pretty cool, huh? They said, oh, heck no. We don't want none of that. The God that they have with them, way more powerful than us. But when I read this, I think about those 12 stones and Joshua telling the people, tell the next generation. Whenever they walk by, tell the next generation. And we think, man, something that miraculous, I don't think I would forget to tell people. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm, leaving here and I'm going to head for Omaha and I started walking and I got to the Missouri River and it just dried up in front of me and I walked across and I would tell some people. I'd be taking pictures. I'd want people to know. But remember, the reason they were on the plains opposite of Jericho was because Moses had to take 28 days to remind them of all the things that God did in the wilderness, because those people didn't tell the next generation. And he had to remind them about crossing the Red Sea. And he had to remind them why there's manna on the ground and why they ate the quail and where the water came from. Because the generation before them didn't keep them informed. That's crazy. Like I said, you'd think they'd be going, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe this. When we left Egypt, the very armies of Pharaoh were destroyed by God's hand. But they're like, we left, and here we are wandering around and kind of getting tired of walking. But here we are. And it's like, really? So at the time, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. I always need to just take a moment and pause when we get to these chapters. He says, I want you to go get some flint knives and go and circumcise all the males in Israel. You got to do it again. Why? Because of what we were just talking about. Before they left Egypt, God had them circumcise all the Hebrew people. And they've had 40 years in the wilderness. And guess what they haven't done for 40 years? Circumcised their children. Oh, we forgot. Oh, really? You just forgot? But see, that's part of the covenant that God made with them. And part of the covenant that he set forth with Abraham. And he reiterated with Moses. And he about put Moses to death before Moses went back to get the people in Egypt, because he hadn't circumcised his children. And he says, you have got to follow this decree and this command. You have to be faithful. And now we're 40 years down the road, and the Israelites aren't circumcised. And God says, Joshua, we got a little housekeeping to do. I can't work with these people. I gave them a simple command, and they didn't do it. They're not my people, because my people would be circumcised. Joshua goes, got it. Joshua and Caleb, they were good. They're the old generation. So Joshua goes, yep, we're on it. Get me some knives. We're going to do this. And the crazy thing is, they have crossed into the enemy land. They are on the other side of the Jordan, flowing river behind them that's at flood stage. There is no retreat. They're there in the enemy land. All the enemy are surrounding them. And God says, now, circumcise all your warriors. Circumcise all the males. There's a story we're going to read later that doesn't work out so well for a town. I don't want to give it away. But he says, I want you to take and circumcise all your men. And Joshua says, okay, because we're going to be obedient to God. And so they do. I will tell you, for the next few days, Israel's army couldn't have fought their way out of a paper bag. Because those guys are going, I ain't going nowhere. I need a bag of frozen peas. Okay. Because this ain't good. And so they're sitting around in camp, and the enemy's all around them, but they were obedient to God, and God melted the hearts of everybody around them with fear when they came in. They were sitting ducks. Physically, militarily, they were sitting ducks. And if all those Canaanite armies would have came and attacked, from a physical perspective, they would have been wiped out. But spiritually, they were being obedient to God, and God goes, I got this. Ain't nobody coming down here. Matter of fact, there ain't going to be anybody with the guts to leave their town. They're going to lock themselves up and stay the heck away from y'all because they don't know what's going on. And there's no way they're going to make a move. And God put that fear in their hearts of the Israelite people. So they sat inside their towns and they sat inside their little fortresses and they just sat there and waited because they know the end is coming. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeath Haraloth. You want to know what that name means? Huh? Close. It's actually literally translated the hill of foreskins. Seriously, that's what it means. Haraloth. You learned a Hebrew word. You know how to say the hill of foreskins now. All right. So it says, now this is why he did so. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the wilderness on the way after leaving Egypt. All the people that came out had been circumcised. Everybody who left Egypt had been. But all the people born in the wilderness during the journey from Egypt had not. The Israelites had moved about in the wilderness 40 years until all the men who were of military age when they left Egypt had died. Since they had not obeyed the Lord, for the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land they had solemnly promised their ancestors to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones Joshua circumcised. He said, these are the ones I'm going to take the land with, because the other ones who came out of Egypt were unfaithful. They doubted, they feared, they had fear that melted their hearts when they saw the inhabitants of Canaan. And God said, I can't do that. I'll wait for the next generation. And so those were the ones who Joshua circumcised. While they were still uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So that place has been called Gilgal to this day. And Gilgal means rolled away. It means it rolled away that shame. That stigma of being slaves in Egypt. That time that you were subject to them. All that is gone now. You are a great nation. All that other stuff is rolled away. It's gone. It says, on the evening of the 14th day of the month. What's significant about the 14th day of the first month? Passover. All right. So here it is. So on the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. This is the first Passover coming into the new land. This is the first real Passover that they have served together. And it says the day after Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land. Land flowing with milk and honey. They had their Passover night. The next day, God said, try it. Eat. Unleavened bread and roasted grain they ate for this feast. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There is no more manna. Why? Well, because God brought them into the promised land. And remember, I just told you that the Jordan was at flood stage. And in the last chapter, when does the flood stage hit? During harvest. God brought them to the promised land and set them on the doorstep and said, the whole place is ready to be harvested. The food's all there. The flocks are ready. The fields are ready. Go ahead and try it. Grab some of the food. Eat it. And so the first time in 40 years, these people are eating something other than manna and quail. And they went, yeah, this is pretty good. And God says, I've laid it all out before you like I promised. And now, you don't need the manna. That was a provision I gave to you so you would know that I was with you. But now look at the land. You know I brought you here. And if you're faithful to me and we go in here, you're going to see these people fall away before you, and you're going to take fields that are ready to be harvested, storehouses that are full of grain already. You're going to have flocks that are all ready for you. You're going to have cities that you didn't build, houses that you didn't build, farms that you didn't have to plow up to this point. And I'm just going to give it all to you. And you're going to walk in and take possession of it. So there was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. Whew. We made it through 2.5 chapters. But it's interesting that God brought them exactly the way that he had promised, even though the people didn't see it. It's also interesting that God said, when the ark goes ahead of you, give it a wide berth. People need to respect that. Don't push it. Don't gather around it. Let the ark do the work. Because that's my presence. And let the people stay back so that they can see what I'm going to do for them. You know, because if you get enough people crowding around, that ark steps out there and people are already crowding around the river, and they're going to say, hey, somebody must have dammed up the river or something. This is pretty nice. We walked across. But when there's absolutely nobody there, and that first priest steps his foot in the water and the water stops and it rolls back, the people that were there back at least 1,000 yards went, whoa. Whoa, that's new. Because you see, these are all people that were born in the wilderness. They didn't cross the Red Sea, and if they did, they were very little. And they went, wow, this is God moving. He says, now come into the land. Trust me. Make this covenant with me, the covenant of circumcision. Make this covenant with me, and I've got the rest of it taken care of. And they did. And then he said, now, grab a little of the food. Tell me if I lied to you. Because you see, I told you guys in the wilderness that I'm taking you to the promised land. I told the people of Egypt when we left, I'm taking you to the promised land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, a land with great produce and good food. Try it. And they did, and he went, see? It's like bringing a Midwest boy like myself down to Florida. My wife and I went down there last year for our anniversary, and I went in, and people are going, oh, you got to try the seafood. And I'm like, I don't really like seafood. They said, oh, no, you got to try the seafood. Okay. So I went down to a place right on the ocean, this little kind of hometown shack, because I asked one of the people at the place we were staying. I saw this guy, and I said, hey, where would you go eat seafood? I said, I know where all the pamphlets are from. Where do you take your family? And he goes, oh, I go to this place. And he gave me the address, and so I went down there. I ordered it, and oh, my gosh, I like seafood. I was like, this is wonderful. But I've grown up here. Seafood to me comes out of a bag from a freezer section, and it ain't that great. So I told the guy, I said, man, it was a wonderful experience. I loved that food. And he goes, oh, yeah, I know. He goes, do you want me to give you a name of a good steakhouse? I said, you can't do that. He said, what do you mean? I said, you don't have good steak down here. He goes, yes, we do. I said, not unless it comes from Nebraska or Iowa. And he goes, what? I said, your good steak comes from us. I said, I didn't know what seafood tastes like. You've never had a pork chop or a steak before. And he goes, really? And I said, oh yeah, I've eaten down here. I've eaten your beef. And I said, it's okay. But I said, no, it's not that great. I think I'm going to have to come visit you in Iowa. And I said, yeah, if you want to eat some good meat, you will. But I said, you want seafood? Stay right here because we don't have it. But that's what it was. God says, when you enter into this land, you're going to eat food like you've never seen. You thought you had food and grain in Egypt? Nothing compared to this. This is the finest. And when they got in there, they're going, I don't know. I had, this, that, and the other. But he goes, try it. And they ate it. They went, ooh, yeah. This is good stuff. He said, you see, I haven't led you astray. And here's the neat thing. I'm going to close with this. As we go through Scripture over and over and over again, not just in the things that we call prophecy, the promises of God are fulfilled. And each time he goes, it's good, isn't it? And the people go, yeah. Just like I told you, isn't it? Yeah, you didn't lie to me. This is it. This is the good stuff. And this is a great example of him saying, I'm going to bring you into the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land that you are going to love. And they went, wow. God, you delivered. You did that. Now go ahead and read from here all the way to the end of the book of Revelation. You can do that before next Wednesday if you want. I'll take your word for it if you do, unless you want to recite it. But anyway, go ahead and look through the entire Bible and believe that every promise that God has made has either been fulfilled exactly as he has said, or it's going to be. Not one place in Scripture does somebody go, oh, God, you missed that. You said it was going to be like this, and really it's like that. No, you don't ever see that. I can show you a lot of places where men said, hey, I got this, and it blew up in their face. But not once is God's prophecy or promise not fulfilled as he spoke. This is a great example. We're going to see it continue on. He's going to ask them to do some weird things. And when they do, they work out exactly as God promised. And as we go through our life and we look at God's word, remember, everything he's promised is going to work out just like he said. And that's pretty awesome. So, all right. Questions? Yeah. Yes. So he said, Joshua said, choose one man from each of the 12 tribes. Each one of them grabs a stone, and then each stone will represent their tribe. And they made this pile of stones. And bunny trail. Every time I've gone over there and I've been down in that valley, I want to go. Just kind of look around and see if there's a pile of stones. Well, it says they're still here to this day. I know this was written a long time ago, but I'm like, really? There's just stones? Wouldn't it be awesome to be walking through the weeds down there and trip over a pile of 12 stones? That'd be awesome. Anyway, that's just my own little mind at work. But yeah, so each of the 12 tribes had a stone to represent, and that way it showed God's promise to each of the 12 tribes. Yeah. Any other questions? Or yes, Joe.
So, in the desert for 40 years, not one person could do the law and see all the miracles and circumcise any of their kids.
Not that we know of. There may have been, but it doesn't record it anywhere. And, Moses wrote the law with them right there, and he explained it to them. And so there may have been some early on or something that we don't have record of, but as a general whole, the predominant group of people, the people just quit doing it when they got in the wilderness. We don't have to do that anymore. That was yesterday's stuff. And you'd think that they would remember that one. The guys, if nothing else, would go, I do remember there is another little bit to that law. But, yeah, Mike, we're not forgetting, are we? Heck no.